He had lived alone for 8 years, speaking only to his horses and the wind. But when they hung the Apache woman from the ancient cottonwood in the heart of Cold Pine, Jed Harper realized his quiet days were finished because the fellows pulling the noose tight sported deputy badges, and the minister reciting the blessing had crimson stains on his palms. The breeze sliced across the gorge like a knife, every burst a signal that this territory offered no room for compassion. Jed lingered near his cart, a bag of grain clutched in his grasp, when he noticed her toes swinging. Not the gentle swing of a soul already departed. She was still drawing air. Barely. He froze, the sack slipping to the dirt. Nobody came to Cold Pine for justice. Not anymore. Not since the sheriff had sold the law to the highest bidder. The girl's body jerked once. Then again, Apache. His blood turned cold. Last time he saw a woman in a deer-skinned dress, his wife had still been alive. His hand moved to the knife at his belt. Not a thought, just muscle memory. The crowd murmured, boots shuffled, but no one stepped forward. This wasn't a trial. It was a message, but something held him back. Maybe it was the way her eyes stayed open, unblinking through the noose. Maybe it was how the wind carried her silence like a song unsung. Or maybe it was the realization that no warrior ever begged. But this wasn't war. This was execution, and the girl hadn't even screamed. The town slept like it always did. Shutters bolted, lamps snuffed out, silence stretched thin as paper. But Jed Harper wasn't sleeping. Not tonight. He lay in his cot above the stable, boots still on, staring at the beams overhead. The girl's face haunted the dark. Another beauty, though. There was strength in her cheekbones, in the way she didn't cry, but the silence in her gaze. Assilence that screamed louder than any noose could choke. He got up slow, quiet. Moonlight spilled silver through the cracks in the barn siding. His rifle stayed behind. He didn't need a bullet tonight, just a blade down the slope, past the dry creek bed and the leaning church. The cottonwood tree waited, its limbs spread wide like it was always ready to take someone. No guards, no torches, just the girl's figure swaying softly in the breeze like she'd become part of the night. He moved fast once he got close, knife drawn, boots muffled by dust. One slice, clean through the rope, and she fell into his arms like she weighed nothing. A ragged breath escaped her lips. Still alive, she was light, skin cold, dress torn where the rope had rubbed raw. Her wrists were bound, too. He cut those next, worked slow so he didn't hurt her more. She didn't speak. Didn't even open her eyes, but her chest rose and fell, faint as a whisper. Jed didn't look back as he carried her out of town. No need to. Cold Pine had made its choice. So had he. By the time he reached the edge of his land, the eastern ridge was glowing faint orange false dawn sneaking over the bees. His cabin sat quiet, windows dark, chimney cold, just how he Wild West rescue story liked it. He laid her on his cot, pulled the extra wool blanket down from the shelf, lit the small stove, and poured water into a tin pot. The fire crackled, soft, her breath steadied in the glow. He finally looked at her close. She couldn't have been more than 20. Apache, for sure. Cheekbones like his wife's, bruises on her neck, blood at the temple, dirt ground into her skin. But beneath all that stillness, the kind forged in fire, not fear. He touched Theskar across her palm. Old, deep, deliberate. A survival mark. Not the first rope she'd escaped, he reckoned. He sat beside her, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. 8 years alone, and now this girl was breathing his air, lying in his bed. He didn't know her name, didn't know her story, but he knew this. The men who hung her weren't done. And neither was she, not yet. The fire was dying when she stirred. Jed had dozed in the rocking chair, rifle across his lap. The creak of old wood woke him first, then the soft rustle of the blanket. She was sitting up barely, blinking at the shadows like she didn't trust they were real. Her mouth opened, cracked lips moving soundlessly before a whisper found its way out. "Where am I?" Jed didn't move. He let his voice carry low, steady. "My land, my cabin. About 6 miles north of Cold Pine." She blinked slow. "They hung me. They tried." Silence settled between them again. She didn't ask who he was. Didn't thank him. Just pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders like she wasn't sure if she was safe or not. Jed respected that. Trust wasn't free in these parts. Not anymore. After a long minute, she said, "My name's Nantan." It means spirit talker. Jed nodded once. Jed Harper. She tilted her head slightly, eyes narrowing. You ain't army number, but a rancher lived alone for years. You cut me down. Seemed like the right thing to do. That earned him a faint smile. Not warm, more like someone remembering what warmth felt like. She looked down at her hands, the bruises on her wrists. They said I stole a horse, that I was trouble. Jed leaned forward, his voice grave. You did? She didn't answer. Just stared at the fire like it held a secret only she understood. Head didn't push. Some stories took time to bleed out. Instead, he poured water into tin cup and handed it to her. She drank slow, careful, then set it down with hands that trembled just once before stilling again. Outside, the wind had shifted. The clouds that had loomed all night were thinning, but Jed knew better than to trust clear skies in the west. They'll come looking, she said finally. Not a question. Yeah, he replied. And if they find me here, they will not forgive you. She looked at him then. Really looked like she was measuring the shape of his scars beneath the quiet. Whatever she saw, it was enough. She nodded once, short. Jed got up, stoked the fire, then walked to the door and looked out across the land. Empty still, but he could feel the wrongness in the wind. Towns didn't hang girls without backup plans. Tomorrow, someone would ride out with questions, with guns. But tonight, under a roof he hadn't shared in years, a hunted girl was alive. That was enough for now. At first light, the buzzards circled. Jed spotted them before he heard the hooves. 4 black shapes in the sky, gliding slow and deliberate over the south ridge. That meant only one thing in these parts. Something had died or was about to. He stepped onto the porch, coffee in hand, shotgun propped against the doorframe. The wind brought dust and distant echoes. Then the faint rhythm of hooves across dry earth. Behind him, the floor creaked. Nan stood at the threshold, blanket around her shoulders, eyes still sharp despite the bruises. She didn't ask what he saw. She already knew. Jed turned his head slightly. Wild West Rescue Story Company. How many? 3? Maybe 4. Moving slow like they're not sure what they'll find. She stepped onto the porch beside him, her face unreadable. They'll burn your place down just to prove a point. Jed took a sip of his coffee. Let them try. They stood in silence, watching the horizon. The horses appeared first, dust-coated, lean and wired for trouble. The riders wore guns low and mouths tight. Sheriff Brackett led them as expected. Same worn badge, same preacher's voice wrapped around a killer's instinct. He pulled up 5 yards short of the fence line, tipping his hat. Morning, Harper. Jed didn't answer. Brackett continued, eyes scanning past him toward the cabin. Heard there was trouble last night. Girl went missing from town. You wouldn't have seen anything strange out this way, would you? Jed held his ground. Plenty strange out here, Sheriff. Coyotes howling like ghosts, buzzards flying lazy, but no girl. The sheriff smiled thinly, but his eyes didn't. Now that's funny. Some folks swear they saw tracks leading out this direction. Bare feet, small prints, fresh. You know anything about that? Jed sipped his coffee again. Slow, not a tracker, Sheriff. Ideal in fence post sand horses. Brackett's smile faded. He looked to his men, then back at Jed, just so we're clear. Harboring a fugitive makes you an accessory even if she's Apache, especially if she's Apache. Jed met his gaze. You done? Brackett chewed on that a second, then reined his horse around. For now they rode off slow, but not aimless. Jed knew they'd be back with more men with torches, maybe worse. He watched until the dust settled, then turned to Nantan. She didn't look scared. Just ready. They're coming, he said. She nodded. Let them. And in that moment, Jed understood what kind of fight this was going to be. Not about guilt or innocence, not even about survival. It was about refusal. Refusing to lie down, refusing to vanish. 2 Wild West redemption. Ghosts of the old world standing side by side on land that had forgotten kindness. The wind carried the echo of hooves long after the riders were gone, and the buzzards kept circling. That night, the wind changed. It blew east, hot and dry, the kind of wind that whispered of matches and revenge. Jed stood beside the barn, checking the lantern oil when he saw the glint just for a second off glass far up the ridge. A scope watchers. They're setting up, he said aloud, though Nanton was already at this side. They'll wait until dark, she said, pulling the blanket tighter around her. Then they'll come with fire. Jed nodded. They want to make an example from the edge of the barn. They could see the cabin. Weather-beaten but sturdy, built by hand, one beam at a time. By a man who thought if he worked hard enough, maybe grief wouldn't catch him. Now it might burn in a night. He turned to her. If you go now, follow Thedry Creek west. You might have half a day's head start. She didn't answer. He dropped his gaze. You don't owe me this. Her voice was calm. And you don't owe me either. But here we are. They went quiet again. As dusk fell, Jed opened the hidden trap in the barn floor. Inside, sacks of powder, coils of wire, and iron devices wrapped in burlap leftovers from an older life. Rail wars, they called them, blasting through mountains to lay steel. Killing men when negotiation failed. He hadn't touched them in 8 years. You built this place like a fortress, she said, crouching beside him. No, Jed replied. I built it like a Wild West storytelling tomb. I just didn't know it. They worked in silence, traps laid, fuses set. The barn wired to light the night sky if need be. After they stood by the porch, the last bit of light draining from the world. What if they bring others? Sheesked. Then we'll teach him what it costs. In the distance, a dog barked, a signal, then another echoed. Brackett's men were closing in. Jed lit a match and stared at the flame. It danced small in the breeze, fighting to stay alive. Helled it burned down to his fingers before snuffing it. Get ready, he said, and somewhere deep inside he felt the old fire stir again. Not anger, not fear, just the clear, steady weight of purpose. The first fire started near the coral. Jed saw the flicker before Hesmelled the smoke. Then came the crackling tree grass, igniting like paper, wind fanning it across the slope toward the barn. He didn't panic. Fire was an old enemy, predictable. Hungry, yes, but not clever. Men were the real danger. He stood at the fence watching the fire line crawl. From the trees beyond, he could hear laughter. Brackett's men, drunk on power and whiskey, celebrating early. They think it's over, Nanton said, appearing beside him, face ghosted by the firelight. Jed nodded. We'll let him believe it. He turned toward the barn. Flames were creeping toward its northern wall. The charge inside wouldn't ignite yet, not without his signal. But if the roof caught, the whole thing could go. Time? She asked. Jed looked toward the moon, now high and bright. We've got minutes, he motioned her toward the cabin. Keep low. If the signal comes, don't wait. Nanton paused. And you? I stay. Her jaw clenched. You stay and die. He met her gaze. I stay and finish. She didn't argue. Just disappeared into the shadows. Jed turned back to the barn. The firelight danced higher now, flickering on the iron nails, licking up the edges of the haystack like a preacher reading scripture. He moved to the fuse box, pimple-wired to run down the slope along the fence posts into the base of the barn. He lit a stub of sulfur match. The wind threatened to kill it. He cupped it, waited, then their movement at the tree-line. Figures breaking from the brush, rifles low, boots fast. 6 of them now, Jed whispered. He touched the match to the wire. The hill answered. A thunder crack split the valley as fire leapt from the barn in a burst of light and debris. Men screamed, some thrown clear, others not that lucky. The hill shook. Horses bolted. Somewhere behind the flames, Brackett's voice shouted something that didn't sound like victory. Jed watched without moving. From behind the smoke, Nantan emerged, blood on her cheek, a knife in hand. 2 down by the west fence, she said. Rest scattered. He handed her his spare rifle. Let's end it before they regroup. And together they vanished into the night. The rancher who buried his grief in dust and the woman who refused to be forgotten. Some fights weren't about winning. They were about refusing to lose. The smoke hadn't settled when the spurs started ringing. Fainted first metal brushing rock, then louder. Measured, not hurried. Jed froze behind a split rail post. Heart stilled. This wasn't Brackett's men. They shouted, cursed, kicked dust when they moved. This sound, who the hell? Nantan whispered beside him. Jed responded with silence. He already knew. There was Ammon on silhouetted in dust outside Carson. Crossing 10 years back who'd ridden into a crooked sheriff's camp, with no more than a cattleman's rope and a tired mare and left with blood on his saddle and 4 lawmen dead. Jed never forgot that walk. Calm, rhythmic, the sound of finality. And now it echoed again. The spurs stopped. A voice came out loud. Not sharp. Just clear. Jidayakani. Jed stepped from behind the fence. That name's rusted. I go by Jed now. The figure emerged from smoke, long coat, dust-colored hat, rifle across his back. You always were better at burying names than burying trouble. Jed squinted Caleb Brackett. The man smiled. You knew I'd come. Jed nodded. You always did like to watch your own fire from up close. Brackett looked around. You turned this place into a war field. Jed shrugged. World brought ware to my gate. I just answered the knock behind him. Nanton stepped forward. Her knife was still red. Brackett's gaze flicked to her. So this is what you choose now, bleeding out 4 ghosts and women. Jed didn't look at her. I choose not to run anymore. Silence stretched. Then Brackett stepped forward slow. No rifle, he said. Just you and me, Jed. Like before, Jed dropped his repeater in the dirt. Fine. They stood 10 paces apart. 2 men whose lives had frayed down to this thread. Wind blew ash between them. A hawk circled above. Quiet witness to what the world kept trying to forget. And then it happened. The shot echoed once, then silence. Brackett fell slow like a man giving up more than blood. His revolver slid from his fingers, eyes wide, not in fear, but in something older, recognition. Jed stood over him, chest heaving. You shouldn't have come. Brackett's lips moved. Maybe a curse, maybe a prayer. Then he stopped, breathing. Nantan walked over. Careful, you okay? Jed nodded. But it was the kind of nod a man gave a grave, not a friend. From the ridges, what was left of Brackett's men scattered. The fire had eaten half the corral. The barn was nothing but a black skeleton. But it was quiet now. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that meant the fight was over. But peace hadn't come yet. Later they buried the bodies. No markers, no prayers, just dirt, sweat, and the wind to remember them. Jed kept Brackett's hat, not for Wild West drama sentiment, just to remind himself what silence caused. As the sun dipped behind the hills, Nanton stood at the edge of the porch, baby in her arms. The child had slept through thunder, fire, and death. Now she watched the sky like it towed her something. Well, head north at first light, Nantan said. Sister waits near Red Basin. Maybe start again. Jed watched her. You'll make it, she nodded. And you? He looked at the land, scarred, burned, but alive. I'll ride south. Mary Hendricks still needs escort. Denver trail's long. Nanton's smile was faint. The lonely man rides again. Not lonely, he said, looking at the baby. Just unfinished. She reached out, touched his shoulder. It said more than goodbye ever could. The next morning, the trail split, one to the mountains, one to the plains. Jed rode westward, the sound of hooves soft against ash and gravel. Behind him, the wind whispered through broken fences, across burnt soil, over blood that would fade but never be forgotten. And ahead maybe not peace but purpose. Sometimes a man builds fences to keep the world out. But the real strength is in knowing when to open the gate. In the Wild West, justice ain't always about the law. Sometimes it's about standing firm when silence would be easier. Because staying human means not forgetting what deserves to be remembered. Now, click on the video on the screen to hear an even better story than this one with a twist so powerful you won't forget it. Click on the video.